I'm Lisa Roddy. I'm the designer of the Freya Quilt pattern at Shinersview.com. This is a tutorial that is going to just provide a few tips to those of you who are making the Freya pattern. It's a little bit different in that it utilizes some trapezoids, and so as a result I thought putting together a tutorial might be helpful for those of you who are attempting this for the first time. So this is going to cover essentially the cutting of the trapezoid pieces. We'll do both show you how to cut the color piece as well as piece number 6, which is a larger of the background fabric. It will also talk a little bit about how to trim as well as piece these together, and then finally how to assemble a column. So sit back, enjoy, learn a little. Again, this is an accompaniment to the actual pattern, which is for sale in my shop at Shinersview.com. Thanks. What I'm going to be doing is actually working with the baby quilt. The baby quilt is the same as some of the other larger versions, but it only has 3 colors in it, and it's obviously a smaller version. When you purchase the pattern, you can see that the baby quilt is 50 by 42, and then there are other sizes. There's 2 throws, there's a regular throw, and then an asymmetrical, as well as a twin and a queen size. But what I'm going to be working with today is going to be the Freya quilt. So it's a little more complicated to work with trapezoids than it is squares, and the reason being is if you cut out 4 4-inch squares and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then when you sew all 4 of those together, you'll have a pretty good idea whether you were straight or not in terms of how you cut, because of the fact that they're all linear and they're going to line up. When you work with a trapezoid, it's a little different. You don't have that check because you don't have a square to go against, and so it becomes a little bit more complex or complicated in terms of being able to put that together and to know that what you've done is correct. And therefore, what really has to happen is you need to pay attention to your precision, and precision with respect to both cutting as well as to making sure that you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so if you do both of those well, then this is going to be one of the easier quilts to pull together. It's actually quite quick to pull together, and hopefully it will be quite rapid for you to be able to do if you watch these videos, and it'll help you be able to figure that out a little bit faster. So when you start working with it, what you'll see in table 2 is the number of fabric strips that you need to cut. It's really quite simple. There are strips of color. You're going to need to cut a 6.5 inch and a 1 1/4 inch strip of each color. And there's going to be an 8.5 inch and a 2.5 inch strip of the background fabric. What I'm working with today, my background fabric is going to be gray, and my colors are going to be various shades of blue and green. And so for the baby quilt, which is what I'm making, you need, for the colors, you need 1 strip of 6.5 and 1 strip of 1 1/4, which I've got here. And then for the background fabric, you need 3 strips of the 8.5 inch, which is what we've got here, and 6 strips of the 2.5 inch. So pretty simple to cut out the main pieces that you're going to be working with. The next thing you're going to be doing is looking at the table 3. And table 3 tells you the pieces, and these piece numbers refer back to the actual photo or the image of each of the different size quilts, this again being the baby quilt. And colors number 1 through 5 are the color pieces. That would be these pieces here, the trapezoids that are in color. Again, it's a baby quilt, so there's only 3. As you work your way up in terms of larger quilts, you can have up to 5 different colors in it. But in this particular one, there's only 3. And so what this does is it tells you of each color and of the background fabric. So basically for each one of these pieces, how many you need to cut. And for pieces 1 through 5, which are the colors, you're going to need 8 pieces. And for piece number 6, which is the other piece I'm going to show you how to cut here, you're going to need 6 pieces. So step B is all about cutting the trapezoids. And as you can see here, I have my first color, so this is going to be piece number 1. And I've cut a strip that is 6.5 inches wide. And then this is going to be piece number 6, which we'll get to in a few minutes, and I've cut a strip here which is 8.5 inches wide. But starting with piece number 1, the first thing that we want to do is we want to trim away the selvage on this end. So just get yourself. So you're going to trim that away. And then what you want to do is you want to take your piece and you want to push it so that the trim selvage is on your left and the fold is over on your right. And then using table number 4, we're going to be marking and making some marks on this piece. What I've done is I've lined the piece up so that it's running along a strip here. You just want to have a nice straight edge on it. And what we're going to be doing, I'm going to go through this really quickly with you, is this is for the color pieces. There's a top and a bottom mark. This is the top, this is the bottom. And there is where it says line 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the marks that you're going to be making. If you look at this image over here, this would be image number 2 in your pattern. What you'll see is there's a line. So line 1, line 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if I go over to line 5, I will be making 4 sets. According to the table on the previous page, on table 3, for a baby quilt, I need to cut 8 trapezoids. Because this is double thickness, I actually need to make 4 sets, which will give me 8 pieces. So I'm going to be using 5 lines. Again, set 1, 2, 3, 4. That gets me to line 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I'm going to go in line 5 and show you really quickly how this is done. Lay your ruler along the top, aligning at 0 with the left edge of your fabric. Do a nice good line up there. And then you're going to be looking at the top, line 0. The first mark you're going to make is going to be at 0. So obviously we don't do anything there. The second mark you're going to make is going to be at 3.5. So you go to 3.5 inches and make a tick mark. And then the third one you're going to do is at 5.5. The fourth one is at 9. And the fifth one is at 11. Now you're going to do the same thing on the bottom. This time it actually sits on your fabric right here. You're going to line it up so it's nice. And your first one is going to be at 3/4 of an inch. Your second tick mark is going to be at 2 3/4 of an inch. Your third tick mark is at 6 1/4 inches. Your fourth tick mark is at 8 1/4. And your last tick mark is at 11 3/4. Okay, now what you want to do is a little bit of connect the dots. So remember your first one here for the top is at 0, so it's that top corner. And this is your first one on the bottom. And so what you're going to do is draw a line that's going to go from your bottom tick mark to your top corner. And then your second line is going to go from the second tick mark at the top to the second tick mark at the bottom. I'm going to do that for number 3. Number 4. And number 5. Now when I pull this away, you'll see this is piece number 1. This is set number 1, set number 2, set number 3, and set number 4. And that will allow these to all be 2 inches at the bottom and 3.5 inches at the top. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to trim, and this precision matters at this point. So you want to have drawn your line straight, and you want to make sure that you take a few minutes and really make sure that your cuts are straight. So there you go, first set of which is the first piece with the background fabric. That's piece number 6 down here. For a baby, I need to cut 3 sets. I need 6 total, and therefore I need to cut 3 sets. So again, I want to trim. Do a good job here, trimming off the selvages. And then we want to make sure that we're setting the selvages to the left, the trim selvages to the left, and then the fold to the right. Now this one's going to go a little further, so I need to have a larger ruler. So I'm out of the way and move these pieces. So again, I want to set this up at the very top. I want to make sure that I am aligned on the left-hand side, bringing this down right up against my fabric. And on this one now, I'm moving to the background fabric number 6, top and bottom. And I'm going to be cutting 3 sets, 1, 2, 3, which means I need 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And so the first line here at the top is 0. The second one is at 7 1/4. The third one at the top is at 12 1/2. And the fourth one at the top is at 19 3/4. Moving down to the bottom, the bottom is at, oops, the ruler with it. Take the ruler. I don't use the marks on the mat because they're not always perfect. You're always much better off using the marks that are on your ruler than using the marks on the mat. These things stretch, they get bent, they shrink. There's a lot of things that happen to them. And so if you can, you should always try to use the marks that come on the ruler. And so on this one now, I'm at the bottom. I want a tick mark at 1. I want the next tick mark at 6 1/4. I want the next tick mark at 13 1/2. And I want my final tick mark at 18 3/4. Now I'll go back to the smaller ruler just because it's easier to work with. And now what I want to do is, again, I can do what I did before, which is I can draw the line from the tick mark up to 0. I'm going to go ahead and cut that one, because I'm going to show you what else you can do. So once you've done this a couple of times, didn't take that end off quite right. Make sure you, again, accuracy matters. So once you've done this a few times and you start to get used to it, then what you really can do is just work from tick mark to tick mark with your ruler, and you don't need to do the marking on it. There's my first set. So the next step after you cut out the trapezoids is in step C, and that's cutting out the remaining pieces. And that's using the strips that were identified in table 2 to cut into the pieces that are identified in number 3. One of the first things that you're going to be cutting out are these pieces here. And this is piece number 8, and it sits at the end of the trapezoid. So on the baby quilts, that means that here is the color piece. You can see piece number 8. The end of every trapezoid has a piece number 8. So that's the piece that we're going to be working on next. It starts by making a 2.5 by 2 1/4 inch piece. So from a 2.5 inch strip, you're going to be cutting these at 2 1/4. Now, if you look, 2.5 inch and 2 1/4 is pretty close. So you want to make sure that you're doing these correctly when you put them together. And what you want is you want to sew the 2 1/4 inch width. So you want it to be 2.5 inches this way and 2 1/4 inches this way. You want to sew that onto the narrow end of each of the trapezoid pieces. So you'll be doing that like that. Once you've done that, you can see here, I've done a few in advance. Now the next step in step D is to actually trim them. And this, pointing out to you again, this is another point where accuracy really matters. And so what you're going to be doing is taking your straight edge, your ruler, and you are going to be lining it up from this edge here back to this edge here. You don't want to have a whole bunch left over. You don't want to be way over this way. You want to be as close as you can right to that edge on that piece. So, you know, kind of move it around a little bit so you can see that you've gotten just to the edge of it and you feel good about that. When you do your trimming, if you catch a hair of a piece, it's okay, but you really don't want to be leaving a lot on here. And then what you're going to be doing is trimming off this excess piece here. So you can see by taking that piece off now, you can see now I have this nice clean alignment. Now we're going to trim the other side. Where I want to be when this piece is finished is I want this end to be 3.5 and I want this end to be 2 inches. So, sorry, 1.5 inches. Say that again. So keeping that in mind, I'm again echoing down this side here, staying as much as I can just on the very edge of it. And you can see here, but when I go from this point to here, I'm really right at 3.5 inches on this end, which is great. And then at this end, I need to move it a little bit so I can see where 1.5 inches. There we go. So this is my 1.5 inch line. This is my edge. Coming back up here, you can see I've moved off a little bit. So I want to make sure that I'm really right on that edge so that this corner here is at 3.5 and this is on the edge. Move this so that it's right at 1.5 down on that end. And cut that other piece off. And so now what I have is this shape that you're seeing here. This is this shape that you're seeing right here. Okay, so I'm going to do another one, not quite as slow, just to be able to give you an idea how it works without taking you through step by step. So side number 1, looking at it really carefully. And then the other side, 3.5 inches on one end, 1.5 inches on the other end. It's that simple. One more, just to make you feel like you've got it. So again, on this end, the first cut is pretty easy as long as I'm just going right along that very edge. Second cut now is when I have to pay a little bit more close attention. I want 3.5 inches at that top bit, and I want 1.5. This is my 1.5 inch line here. That's my 3.5 inch line there, and now I just cut this piece off here. Okay, so that is how we attach the trapezoid to piece number 8, or piece number 1 to piece number 8. So we've now reached step E, which is where we're starting to take what we put together in step 2, where we did the different colors. I've got 2 of them showing here. If you remember, this was color 1, this is color number 2. And so what we're starting to do is then apply piece number 10 to the bottom of that. And so taking a quick look again at the baby quilt, that means what I'm doing is I'm going to be sewing to start with to the left. So you can see 2 here with the small pointing end coming to the left. I'm going to be sewing piece number 10 onto the bottom of these piece number 2s. And so there's going to be 4 of those. Now it's important to note that on the left assembly, there is no number 1s. And the reason why is because when the 1s are facing this way, that's where piece number 6 goes in, and we'll get to that as we start to put the assembly together. But from this standpoint, all you're going to be doing is sewing 10 onto the bottom of 4 of these to the left. So what does that mean? What that means is that's piece number 1, so we'll take piece number 2. So you're literally going to lay this piece here, going to the left, and then you're simply going to take this, oops, that's 2 pieces, simply take your piece number 10 and you're going to lay it right across here. Now, a couple of things to note. You want to make sure that you start sewing at the narrow end, and you'll see in a minute why that matters. And you want to make sure that you're doing your best to really be lining these up well and doing a good 1/4 inch seam as you go along, particularly at the ends. The ends are sometimes the easiest to get away from you because the fabric starts to shift a little bit as it goes through the machine, but the ends are really important, okay? So you're going to be sewing along here. When you're finished with that, this is what it's going to look like. So I've just simply sewn it along here, again, starting at the narrow end and matching up. And now what I'm going to want to do is finish the trim out from, finish the trim out here from step E. I want to be able to trim this so that it goes straight. And what that means is I want to trim this bottom piece so it is in line with the straightness of the trapezoid. So again, I'm lining this up as nicely as I can, and I'm going to cut along there. Now, the reason why you wanted to start sewing it at this end is because you can see, because of the way this piece is sitting here, if you start sewing at this end first, this piece here will be moved in and you won't be able to cut this. So always start sewing when you're sewing these pieces together, always start sewing from the narrow end. So I'm going to trim this, and I'm going to flip it around, and there's a little bit less to trim on this one. So again, I'm going to be as straight as I can on this piece here, and I'm simply going to trim that off. So got a second one here I can show you. Again, same thing, super simple. Let's start with this end first. We'll cut this bit off, and then turning it around. Now I just want to really make sure that I am in alignment with that straight bit on the colored trapezoid, and then trim this bit off, okay? So that's how you're going to create those sub-assemblies. Now that's the left side in E. If you move on to the next page, which is page 7, you're going to do the exact same thing for F, except now what you're going to be doing is turning it to the right. So now you can see, here's my sub-assembly to the right. This is the untrimmed version, trimmed version up here. So grab my ruler, and again, I'm going to be aligning up with the vertical edge of the color piece, not of piece number 10. So I want to take this, I want to line it up as close as I can to get it as straight as I can, and I'm going to trim a bit off, and then I'm going to come back to the other side and again line it up with the color piece as close as I can without cutting into that piece. There we go. And I now have the right assembly. And so you can see, pretty simple to do, pretty quick to make. So I'm going to go ahead and make all of these now for the left assemblies and the right assemblies. And then I will come back and show you how to actually assemble the quilt. So now you are ready to use the pieces that you created in step E and step F, those being the left assemblies and the right assemblies, as well as the piece of number 12 that you cut out before. So what we're going to be doing is working on, if you go to the quilt that you're making, this one being the baby quilt, you'll see there's column 1, 2, 3, 4, there'll be 5 and more for larger quilts, but for the baby quilt, there's 4 columns, and we're going to be working on column 2 and column 3. And so at this point, we're going to be setting up this one here, starting with 12 at the top and the bottom, 12 at the top of the bottom, and setting up the 2 columns. Hello again. So we now have reached step G, which is piecing together the center columns. So for the baby quilt, that means columns 2 and 3. So I've already lined up column number 2 here. I've started on column number 3, and then I'll just walk you quickly through how I finish that up. So this is color number 3 with the left side, color number 2 with the right side. These are coming from the sub-assemblies that we made. This is color number 3 with the left side, color number 2 with the right side. And then finally, the very bottom piece is what we made in D. It did not have a piece number 10 onto the bottom of it, so it's just simply there. And then finally, piece number 12. Here we go. So what I'm going to do now is stitch each of these together. So I now have 2 columns that'll be stitched together, and I will be back when I finish with that. So step G is now complete. I've pieced together columns 2 and column 3. A couple of tips at this point. One is take a photograph of it with your phone.
And the reason being is if one of these has been misplaced, if something's on the wrong side, particularly if you have more columns, because you're working with colors nonstop, it becomes a little harder for you to see it. By taking that photograph and looking at the image, it'll pop right out at you. So at this point, I actually take a lot of photographs as I'm going through and building my quilts, because it allows me to see anything that's out of place. And if I want to fix it, this is the time to fix it, as opposed to once the whole quilt's been put together. Another thing is that if you find that you're trying to piece one of these in here and it's not fitting properly, it just seems like the size is off. It may be that you made a mistake in step E or F in terms of trimming. Remember, you need to trim block piece 10 based on the shape of the piece that you made in step D. And I just did this, so that's why I'm pointing this out. So that means that you're trimming this one down here. It's easy to get messed up on and not trim this one this way and instead trim it this way. And that's what happened to me. And once that happens, you're done, because the piece is now too small to fit in. And so you have to just create that piece again, which takes a couple of minutes. But anyway, so that's a step to do there. And then I just trimmed out a little bit of the bits and bobs on the edges here. Do not try to get a clean edge. It just doesn't matter that much. But if you got a piece that's sticking in a little bit more, it's fine to trim it off if you want to do that. So what I've done is laid out column 1, and I've actually sewn this one together because I want to be able to show you before I start showing you on column 4 what to do. So column 1, this is piece 12, I believe, up here at the top. Sorry, this is piece 11, and then there's some piece 6s, and then this is piece 12 at the bottom. And then these are the ones that you created. These are the ones that did not get married up to a 10. You created those over in section D. And what you're really trying to do here is you're trying to fit piece 6 into this combination here. You want your lines here to match up. They do not need to be perfect. And the reason they don't need to be perfect is that you're not actually ever going to have this seam join up with this seam. There's going to be a strip here in the middle that is going to be coming down like this. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but you do want to be close, because if you're off by, say, 1/8 of an inch here, then by the time you get down to the bottom, because there's 4 of these, you'll actually be off by 1/2 inch and it just won't look right. So you do want to be close. So what that means is that you need to piece this one, and this one. You need to sew them together. And then before you iron, while it's just sewn together, you're going to come back and you're going to see how well it fits here. And you're going to then, if it fits perfect, you're good to go. But if it doesn't, then you're probably going to need to make some adjustments. And the time to make the adjustments is before you iron it. And it's really simple to do. Do not rip it out. If you rip it out, you start all over again and you're not quite sure where you were. If you think you need to take it in a little bit, then you just sew a smaller seam. If you feel like you need to let it out, if you feel like you need to let it out a little bit, you sew a smaller seam. If you feel like you need to bring it in a little bit, you sew a larger seam, and then rip out the old seam. Still, don't iron it, bring it back over and fit it again. Now, these pieces should be, the original seam that you create on these should be a scant 1/4 inch. If you don't know what a scant 1/4 inch is, go look it up on the internet. There's some really good examples and some really quick videos that you can watch in terms of that. But you wanted to sew these with a scant 1/4 inch to start with. But once you've done that, if what you discover is that it's not quite right here and you either need to stitch it in a little or stitch it out a little, you don't need to restitch the whole line. You can start back about 1/3 of the way and then just restitch it at that point, because you're not making enough of a difference in terms of how you're bringing it in. It's not gonna create a line here. I've done it over here, and you can see these are just nice straight lines. They don't look any different as a result of that. So if you find that you stitch it together with a scant 1/4 inch, you bring it over here, and let's just say that it's a little bit too narrow, that means that you need to make a narrower seam so that you can open this piece up in the middle a little bit. And when you do that, you would simply stitch from about here to here, and then rip out the old seam that you put in, the first seam that you put in from here to here. But don't iron it until you're confident that it's going to fit here. And once you do that, what you'll find is that this may not be a perfect fit to start with, but if you've been consistent throughout, then your fix is going to be consistent throughout. So that's what I found over here. Is I had to narrow it up a little bit, but when I did that, what I found is that each one was the same. And the other thing I would suggest is that if you put one together and it doesn't fit this one perfectly, try these other ones first to see if it fits on those. Because if it does, that's just one less one that you have to take out, and you can just put the other piece up here and start again with that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put one of these together, and if it turns out that it doesn't quite fit perfectly, I'll make my correction and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so I have pieced this together. You can see this is the one that was fitting in here. And so now what I'm doing is I'm bringing it over here and I'm saying, how well does this fit? And it's actually a pretty good fit. So I don't really need to make any adjustments on this, but you can see I didn't iron it yet. Wait until you're confident that it fits, and then go ahead and iron it in place. So I will do the same. I will now test. What you want to do is make the top one and make the bottom one, because those are the two easiest to adjust. The one in the middle, you're going to have, once you start making that, you're going to have these tail ends on it. So do this one first, do this one second, and then do the middle one last. So I'll go do the second one, and we'll see how that fits. So I made the next one down here, and you can see it's actually a nice fit as well. So I'm going to go ahead and iron this, and then I'm going to finish putting this all together. So having made this one and this one, now what you're going to do is make this, you're going to use this last piece. If you've made any adjustments, you've gotten used to kind of what your adjustments are. And again, those adjustments tend to be just on this narrow end here. You don't really have to do anything to this end over here. And so let's just say you're doing this slightly narrower than a scant 1/4 inch as you come in. Just recreate that when you do this one if you've had to make any adjustments. But what you know that you've done on these two that has been effective, do it on here, and it just makes it a little simpler. This is the same as what you've done. It's just a little bulkier to deal with because you've got these other pieces on either end.
So the final step in terms of assembling is, once you've sewn the sashing on, you need to then sew the next. So this is column 1 with the sashing sewed on, and then you'll need to sew column 2 to it. So to be able to get your trapezoids across from each other, I tend to mark on the back of the fabric, and you'll see in a second why that's easier. What you want to do is essentially run your ruler. It'll be just over 3 inches between your seam here and here. Center it so that it's kind of a hair and a hair there, and therefore at 1.5 inches mark here. So basically this position is halfway between these 2 points. And I have marked it like that all the way down. I have also done that on column 2, which is here. And so now what I want to do is be able to marry these together. So you can see now, that's how I know that my trapezoids are even with each other. So simply take them and now match up those spots, and you're going to pin them together here, and again here, and you're going to do that for all 4 or however many are on the quilt that you're making. And I tend to also pin my ends, and that way I know I end up with an evenness at each end. And now what I'm going to do is just simply, so I get it pinned, stitch along here with this side up, because then I don't catch my seams on it. Stitch along this way and then ease between the pins. And that will give us the start of putting together the quilt.